So we are going to start at number 24. With the Kansas-Nebraska Act. What did Stephen Douglas wish? What did Stephen Douglas wish to? What did Stephen Douglas wish to build? What project did he have, or what did he wish to build that caused the need for the Kansas-Nebraska Act? Jack.
Transcontinental Railroad.
Right. He wanted to build a transcontinental railroad. So he wanted to build a transcontinental railroad across the northern part of the country, connecting Chicago to California, basically. So he wanted to build a transcontinental railroad across the northern part of the country, hoping to connect Chicago to San Francisco. And in order to do that, he had to organize the unorganized territories of Kansas and Nebraska. So in order to build that railroad, he had to organize the unorganized territories of Kansas and Nebraska. And for number 24, he had to give the South something, because the South had bought the southern, in the Gadsden Purchase, the South had purchased the southern part of Arizona and part of New Mexico, so they could have a transcontinental railroad. So Stephen Douglas had to basically give the South something. So what did he give the South in the Kansas-Nebraska Act, Jack?
Gave them, they kind of lifted the Missouri Compromise line higher so that slavery can go above there.
They didn't just lift, they just got rid of the Missouri Compromise line. They didn't lift it at, they didn't move it higher or anything, they just got rid of it. So, and how would slavery be decided, Jack, in Kansas and Nebraska?
Free.
No, go ahead. By popular sovereignty. So the question of slavery in Kansas and Nebraska would be decided. The question of slavery in Kansas and Nebraska would be decided according to popular sovereignty. The people would vote on it. So the concession to the South was he was going to get rid of the Missouri Compromise line. So they repealed the 3630 line of the Missouri Compromise. And who spilled?
I don't know.
Oh, is that why you were coming out there?
Yeah.
Okay. What you should do is go to the, let's see.
It's all the way.
Yeah, we're gonna have to call the custodian. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. We'll call the custodian. Yep. Where are you sitting? Right? Was it from the very back? Okay. I'll call the custodian after the review session. What is it?
Soda.
Okay, soda? Okay.
It's red. Oh no, like back there.
Okay. That's okay. You are not the first one to have this happen. We've had actually worse disasters. Believe it or not. So, don't worry about it. Try to ignore it. Don't step in it. Kansas-Nebraska Act repealed the Missouri Compromise line then. So it repealed the 3630 line, and it said that there would be, basically, it would be decided by popular sovereignty, the question of slavery. And that really outraged a lot of Northerners that thought that the Missouri Compromise line should stay. Why are you getting rid of this 3630 line? Why are you having the people vote on slavery, on having a popular sovereignty? What political party ended because of the Kansas-Nebraska Act, and why? So we're still on number 24. What political party ended because of the Kansas-Nebraska Act, and why? Yeah, go ahead, Becca.
The Whigs?
Right, the Whig Party. Do you remember why it meant the end of the Whig Party?
No.
Go ahead, Hannah.
Just because they split my position.
They split over the vote. Almost every Northern Whig voted against it. Almost every Southern Whig voted for it. So they split over the vote. Almost every Northern Whig voted against it. Almost every Southern Whig voted in favor of the Kansas-Nebraska Act. The party was already dying when they lost their leader, Henry Clay, in 1852. And this kind of meant the final end of the Whig Party. All right, going on to number 25. The American Party is also called the Know-Nothings. And the American Party, or Know-Nothings, stood for what major issue? They kind of replaced the Whig Party just for a really short time. What was the major issue of the American Party or the Know Nothing Party? Becca?
Wasn't it they were against immigration?
They were against immigration, right. So the Know Nothing Party or American Party, their main issue was nativism. Nativism, being against immigration. They're the We Hate Immigrants Party. So, nativism. They were against immigrants, especially all these Irish and German immigrants coming in, the Irish coming in after the potato famine. So, they were nativists, they were against immigration. However, their party did not last. Why? Why did the American Party or Know Nothing Party not last, Gina?
Because the people cared more about the problem of slavery than immigrants.
Right, people cared more about slavery than nativism. People cared more about the issue of slavery than the issue of immigration or nativism. So they did not last long. The permanent replacement, number 26, the permanent replacement of the Whig Party was the Republican Party. Born in 20 historic miles from here in Ripon, Wisconsin. The major issue of the Republican Party when it was born was what? What was their major platform, their major issue, the major thing that the Republican Party was for? Becca?
Free soil?
Free soil. No slavery in the territories. So their major issue was no slavery in the territories. And it was really anger over what that caused the rise of the Republican Party. They were born out of anger or rancor or antipathy over what, Becca? Right, the Kansas-Nebraska Act. They were very upset over the Kansas-Nebraska Act because it repealed the 3630 line of the Missouri Compromise. So they were very angry over the Kansas-Nebraska Act, 3630 line being repealed. And that's kind of caused their formation. But free soil was their issue. Number 27, Republicans who believed in free soil believed in the free labor argument. What exactly was meant by the free labor argument? The free labor argument. What was the free labor argument? So this is why they were free soil. This is the reason why they were against slavery in the territories, was because they were free labor, free soil. Why were they against having slavery in the territories? That's the free labor argument. Yeah, go ahead, Hannah.
They didn't want competition for the American Slavery West as part of America.
Right. They basically, the free labor argument was that anyone could go west and get ahead as long as they didn't have to compete against slave labor. The idea is that anyone could go west and get ahead as long as they didn't have to compete against slave labor. So anyone could go west and get ahead as long as they didn't have to compete against slave labor. So that was why it wasn't that they were against slavery in the territories because they thought slavery was morally wrong. The free labor argument is we need to reserve this basically for white people. White people should be able to go west without having to compete with slave labor or with free blacks. A lot of them said no free blacks either. So free labor. Anyone can go west as long as they don't have to compete against slave labor. What was the New England Immigrant Aid Company, number 28? What was the purpose of the New England Immigrant Aid Company? Lydia.
To settle free soilers in Kansas, Nebraska, so they could vote Republican.
Exactly. The purpose of the New England Immigrant Aid Company was to send free soilers to Kansas to make sure that when they voted, Kansas would become a free territory when they had the pop-stop vote. So to basically send 2,000 free soilers to Kansas to sway the vote in favor of free soil. To sway the vote in Kansas in favor of free soil. And they even had guns. So it's 2,000 free soilers equipped with guns, basically. To sway the election to free soil. Number 29. In the first territorial elections for Kansas then, what happened? What happened in the territorial elections for Kansas, Becca?
I forgot like the name of them, but like the people who were on the border of Missouri didn't they come into Kansas and then they swayed the vote in favor of slavery?
Yeah, the people that were in Missouri crossed the border illegally and basically rigged the election and stole the election. So pro-slavery, they call them border ruffians. Pro-slavery border ruffians, pro-slavery border ruffians, crossed the border from Missouri, came into Kansas, voted early and often, and basically stole the election. And pro-slavery forces won control of Kansas. So in what was a rigged election, border ruffians from Missouri crossed the border, intimidated election officials, voted early and often, and stole the election, and pro-slavery forces won control of Kansas. Eventually, there were two legislatures in Kansas because the Free Soilers thought this is a rigged election, this is a stolen election. We're going to set up our own legislature, Free Soil legislature. So eventually in Kansas, there were two governments. There was the pro-slavery government and the Free Soil government. Which was which? Lecompton and Topeka. Which was the pro-slave government that won election in the fraudulent election, and which was the one that said, well, we're going to set up our own government then? Go ahead, Nick.
The Lecompton was the pro-slave, and the Topeka was the free.
Right. The Lecompton legislature was the pro-slave legislature, and the Topeka legislature was the Free Soil legislature. So Lecompton was the pro-slavery one that got into power because of the fraudulent election. And then the Topeka was the Free Soilers who kind of said, we want our own government then, we'll just set one up in Topeka that's Free Soil or Free Stater. And which one did President Pierce recognize? Which one did President Pierce recognize as the official government? The pro-slavery Lecompton or the Free Stater or Free Soil one at Topeka? Jack?
Lecompton.
Right. President Pierce recognized the Lecompton legislature, even though he knew it was a fraudulent election, he recognized the pro-slavery Lecompton legislature as the official legislature within Kansas. Finally, for number 29, I know there's a lot to write down there. Why was it known as Bleeding Kansas? Why was this known as Bleeding Kansas? Go ahead, Lydia.
Kansas had their own civil war.
Right, a miniature civil war happened in Kansas between pro-slavery and free soiler or free stater forces. So it was called Bleeding Kansas because it was a miniature civil war between pro-slavery and free soil forces in Kansas that caused over 200 deaths between 1855 and 1866. Eventually, 200 people died. I think it actually went all the way to 1858, but over 200 people died, a couple $1 million of property destruction, a miniature civil war over whether Kansas would be free or slave. That's what popular sovereignty resulted in. A miniature civil war that killed 200 people and damaged over $2 million in property. Number 30. The thing that caused John Brown to do the Pottawatomie Creek Massacre was the Sack of Lawrence. You want to put it down. The Sack of Lawrence, number 30. What the Sack of Lawrence was there was this pro-slavery posse that came through the free soil town of Lawrence and just raised hell. Just destroyed printing presses, destroyed property, looted places. They went through and this pro-slavery group tore through the free stater town of Lawrence. They called it the Sack of Lawrence. John Brown, anti-slavery John Brown, wanted revenge for that. So what did John Brown, 4 of his sons, and I think 3 others, what did they do at the Pottawatomie Creek Massacre number 30 in 1856? What did they do in the Pottawatomie Creek Massacre in 1856? Go ahead, Brooke.
They just went and killed a bunch of people, like a lot of women and children. Or no, not women. That wasn't this one. They just went and beheaded someone.
Yeah, they killed 5 pro-slavery settlers in cold blood. So they killed 5 supposedly pro-slavery settlers in cold blood. This is where they mutilated the bodies, where they hacked them to pieces, cutting off arms, splitting open heads. They murdered 5 pro-slavery settlers in cold blood. In the Brooks-Sumner incident, the popular U.S. senator that is involved, that's a subject kind of the Brooks Sumner incident was, I believe, Andrew Butler. Andrew Butler was one of the most popular U.S. senators from South Carolina. And Charles Sumner gave a speech that insulted Andrew Butler. So Charles Sumner, Northern abolitionist U.S. senator, gave a speech that very much insulted Andrew Butler of South Carolina. Remember, it basically said he was an idiot. It made fun of the fact he drooled. It criticized him for his stand against slavery. The famous speech that Sumner gave is known as a crime against Kansas. He basically gave a speech, and in it he made fun of this Andrew Butler, number 31, this popular U.S. senator from South Carolina, saying he even drooled when he talked. So, what was Preston Brooks? Why did he care? Why did Preston Brooks care about this? Go ahead, Cole.
He was Butler's nephew.
Cousin. I had it wrong in the notes. Yeah, his cousin. So he was a cousin, and he was also from South Carolina. So Preston Brooks was a representative who is also from South Carolina, and he also was related to Andrew Butler. So here he was a relative of a cousin of Andrew Butler, and he was from South Carolina. He felt personally insulted. So what happened in the Brooks-Sumner affair? Who can tell me Preston Brooks did what in the Brooks-Sumner affair? Because he was mad at Sumner ripping on his cousin or his relative. Ian.
He beat Charles Sumner with a cane.
Right. He beat Charles Sumner with a cane several times until Sumner was unconscious and had to be taken to Europe for nerve treatment, etc. So he beat Sumner several times with a cane. And the whole point of remembering this is that it shows you how seriously things were divided between the North and the South. When you've got a Southerner beating a Northerner to a bloody pulp in the U.S. Senate chambers, you know something's wrong. So it really shows the division between the North and South in it again. Number 32, the Dred Scott decision. What was the reason why Dred Scott was suing for his freedom? What was the reason why Dred Scott was suing for his freedom on this one? Go ahead, Brooke.
He lived in like a free state for a while. He was originally enslaved, but then lived in a free state for a while, and then argued that he should be free.
Right. He lived in a free territory north of the 3630 line. So he said, I lived in a free state, Illinois, for a while, but then I also lived in a free territory north of the 3630 line. I should be free. Now that my master's dead. I had lived there for several years with my master. It was supposed to be free territory. So now that my master's dead, I should be free. Well, first of all, what did the Supreme Court do regarding the lawsuit itself and why? What did it do regarding the suit itself and why, Cole?
They threw it out saying that because he was black, he was a slave, he was still technically property and couldn't sue.
Yeah, that he was not a U.S. citizen. So they ruled that Dred Scott was not a U.S. citizen because blacks, whether slave or free, are not U.S. citizens. So they ruled that Dred Scott was not a U.S. citizen because blacks, whether slave or free, are not U.S. citizens and therefore cannot sue in federal court. So they threw the suit out saying blacks, whether slave or free, are not U.S. citizens and therefore Dred Scott couldn't sue in federal court. But then they went on to make a ruling anyway, even though they had thrown the suit out. What did they say? They said, well, what did they say about Dred Scott's right to be free because he had lived in free territory? Abby?
I think it's like, none or whatever, but the like protection of property and like the territories. So like, they said that he's property, so like it's protected. He has federal protection of that.
Of slavery in the territories, right. They basically ruled that Dred Scott had never been in free territory in the sense that the Missouri Compromise was unconstitutional all along. So they said Dred Scott's being north of the 3630 line did not make him free because the Missouri Compromise was unconstitutional. The Missouri Compromise line was unconstitutional all along, even though it had been repealed by the Kansas-Nebraska Act. The Missouri Compromise 3630 line was unconstitutional all along. And therefore, don't turn the page yet, because of Fifth Amendment protection of property. Fifth Amendment protection of property. What could Congress not do? According to the Dred Scott decision, Congress had no power or right to do what? According to the Dred Scott decision, Congress had no power or right to do what, Cole?
To regulate slavery in the territory.
Right. They had no power to prohibit slavery in the territories because of Fifth Amendment property protection. Slaveholders could take their slaves anywhere in the territories. Congress could not ban slavery in the territories because that would be infringing on Fifth Amendment rights. Slave owners could take their slaves anywhere in the territories. And finally, what did Southerners no longer have a use for? After the Dred Scott decision, Southern Democrats no longer had a use for what policy? Becca? Yep, Southerners had no longer had a use for Pop Sop. Why have people vote on it if they can take their slaves anywhere? There's no point on having a vote because slave owners can take their slaves anywhere. Any questions on that? You guys are doing very well here. Then, number 33, the Lecompton Constitution, the Lecompton Crisis. Finally, they passed the Lecompton Constitution, which would make slavery, it wasn't necessarily passed, it was like passed by the Lecompton legislature, and they had this constitution to enter Kansas. Would it be entering Kansas as a slave state or free state, the Lecompton Constitution? Would it enter Kansas as a free state or slave state? Right. Slave state, right. And President Buchanan at the time, the one after Pierce and before Lincoln, President Buchanan supported it. It would enter Kansas as a free state.
What?
I mean, slave state. It would enter Kansas. Thank you. It would. Sorry about that. It would enter Kansas as a slave state. So it would enter Kansas as a slave state.
Wait, Kansas would enter the Union as a slave state, or?
Yes, under the Lecompton Constitution, which was passed by the Lecompton legislature. So Kansas would enter the Union as a slave state under this Constitution. It never happened, Cole, but it was. That's what the Constitution would have done. So Kansas would be entered into the Union. Kansas would be entered into the Union as a slave state under the Lecompton Constitution. President Buchanan supported it. Now, there were a bunch of boycotted votes on this. They had, for example, in the Lecompton Constitution, the Free Soilers boycotted the vote. And they finally had a supervised, careful vote on it, pushed by Stephen Douglas. Stephen Douglas wanted a vote where it was not rigged, there wasn't people crossing the border voting illegally, that it wasn't being boycotted. He wanted a carefully supervised vote. And there finally was one on the Lecompton Constitution. And in the end, the voters of Kansas overwhelmingly voted what concerning the Lecompton Constitution? In the end, they overwhelmingly voted what? For it or against it? When they actually had a supervised vote. Alyssa?
Against it.
They voted against it. They voted the Lecompton Constitution down. So in the end, Kansas remained a free territory and became a free state. The pro-slavery Lecompton Constitution was voted down in a carefully supervised election. In the end, Kansas remained a free territory and went on to become a free state. And Stephen Douglas pushed for this, and this cost, and I'd like you to put this down, this cost Stephen Douglas support in the South. Southerners started to hate Stephen Douglas because they're like, why is he pushing for a supervised vote? Because they knew they weren't going to win if it was an actual legitimate vote. And they hated the fact he pushed for a legitimate vote on Kansas because they knew it would be voted down and Kansas would be free. So they started to hate Stephen Douglas. We thought he was on our side, they said. What was the impending crisis of the South about? Hidden Our Helpers, number 34. The impending crisis of the South. What was that about? The impending crisis of the South. Go ahead, Abby.
It talked about how like poor Southerners didn't really benefit from slavery and it was actually hurting them.
Yeah, it basically said that poor white Southerners were being hurt by slavery. That slavery was economically damaging poor white Southerners, taking business away from poor white Southerners, and it called on poor white Southerners to abolish slavery because slavery was economically damaging them, it was taking money out of their pocket, and it called on poor white Southerners to abolish slavery. And what did they do concerning this book in the South? Becca?
Didn't they like burn it and didn't let anybody read it?
They tried to burn it and ban it, the Southern planters, because they didn't want white Southerners reading a book saying you should get rid of slavery. So they burned it or banned the book, the planter class did. Number 35, John Brown's raid. What was the purpose of John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry? Alyssa?
To arm slaves in the Savage Revolution and rebellion.
Right, the idea of John Brown's raid was to arm nearby, what they wanted to do is they wanted to arm slaves in order to start a huge slave rebellion. And what did John Brown's raid, what did they take over? What did John Brown take over? What did he take over in order to arm slaves? Like, yeah, go ahead, Cole.
The Federal Armory at Harper's Ferry.
Right, the Federal Armory or Federal Arsenal at Harper's Ferry. So he takes over the Federal Arsenal at Harper's Ferry, the stockpile of guns and weapons, and the idea was they would arm nearby slaves and it would start a huge slave revolt that would eventually spread throughout the South. But unfortunately for John Brown, he got caught. He was executed. Why were Southerners so upset about John Brown's raid? There's two reasons. What's one, Irene?
Wasn't that because he was seen as a martyr?
Yeah, he was treated like a martyr, a hero, someone who dies for a noble cause. So some Northerners treated him like a martyr. And he had memorial services when this convicted criminal was hung. They were also upset about what? Alyssa?
It's like some Northerners like supported him in this and helped him. I don't know.
Right, a group of Northern abolitionists, a small group of Northern abolitionists had given him financial and moral support. So they were also full of rancor because a small group of abolitionists had given John Brown moral and financial support. That leads us to number 36, the mother of all elections, the election of 1860. Abraham Lincoln. I hope you guys are enjoying this on YouTube, by the way. Abraham Lincoln, Stephen Douglas, John C. Breckinridge, and John Bell were the four candidates. Let's go through the platforms on slavery and parties of each of those. Lincoln was what party and what platform on slavery? Becca.
He was a Republican and he was for free soil.
Right, Lincoln was Republican and he was for free soil. So Lincoln, Republican, free soil. Of course, he's going to win the election. Stephen Douglas was? What party? Go ahead, Abby?
He was popular savage.
And he was Northern Democrat. So Stephen Douglas, Northern, because the Democratic Party split. It's a really big point, the Democratic Party split. So Stephen Douglas was Northern Democrat, and he was for popular sovereignty. What about John C. Breckinridge? Alyssa?
Wasn't he a Southern Democrat and he was for the federal protection?
Right, federal protection of slavery. Excellent. So John C. Breckinridge was Southern Democrat, and he was for federal protection of slavery in the territory. So John C. Breckinridge was for federal protection of slavery in the territories. Southern Democrat. And then John Bell, anyone remember about him? Like what party he was or what his platform on slavery was? Yeah, go ahead, Cole.
Wasn't his platform just to keep the Union together? Or was that?
Yep, his platform was to keep the Union together, uphold the Constitution, and Becca?
Was it called like the Union Party?
Constitutional Union Party. So the Constitutional Union Party, no real stand on slavery, uphold the Constitution, keep the Union together, preserve the Union, no real stand on slavery. And Abraham Lincoln won with less than 40% of the vote. Lincoln won with less than 40% of the vote. What was true of the states that voted for Abraham Lincoln? Becca.
They were all free states.
Right. Every single free state voted for Abraham Lincoln. All 18 free states, not one of the 15 slave states voted for him. He got all 18 free states, with electoral votes from all 18 free states. He wasn't even on the ballot, remember, in many southern states. And just so you remember, the Democratic Party split. That's kind of how enabled Lincoln to win. Why did South Carolina secede from the Union on December 20th, 1860, number 37? Why did South Carolina secede or break away from the Union? Yeah, Lydia? Mm-hmm. They justified seceding with a compact theory of states. That the states created the Union and therefore the states were above the Union. So they justified seceding with a compact theory of states, that the states created the Union and therefore the states were above the Union. They voluntarily joined the Union, they could voluntarily leave. But why did they secede? Why did they break away from the Union? Julia?
They thought Lincoln was going to take away this.
Exactly, because Lincoln got elected. They broke away from the Union because of Lincoln's election, and they really believed that Lincoln wanted to take away their slaves. And considering none of the South voted for him, as far as he wasn't even on the ballot in a lot of the states, they wanted out of the Union. So, South Carolina joined with 6 other states to form the Confederate States of America, a separate country for 4 years. The Confederate States of America. 6 other states joined South Carolina, so it's 7 southern states in total. And who is the president of the Confederate States of America, number 38? Matt?
Jefferson Davis.
Jefferson Davis. So Jefferson Davis was the president of the Confederate States of America. And number 39, the Crittenden Compromise of 1860. John J. Crittenden from Kentucky. Henry Clay was dead, so he couldn't save the Union or save the day. Now it was up to another Kentuckian, John J. Crittenden, to save the day. And what was the Crittenden Compromise again? This was a way to try to get South Carolina and the other states back into the Union with no war. What was the main part of the Crittenden Compromise? They proposed a constitutional amendment that would do what, Gina?
Once it reestablished the Missouri Compromise?
Right, a constitutional amendment that would reestablish the Missouri Compromise line, the 3630 line. So a constitutional amendment that would reestablish the 3630 line, and that would say what? That would really win over the South. They said that there would be federal protection of slavery in all territories south of 3630. Not just now, but forever. Whatever future territories the U.S. took over. So the reason they thought it would win over the South is it promised that there would be federal protection of slavery south of the 3630 line, federal protection of slavery south of the 3630 line for all current and future territories. And since a lot of people thought the U.S. would take over Mexico eventually and parts of Central America and Cuba, the idea was all future territories south of 3630 would have federal protection of slavery in the territories. Why did the Crittenden Compromise not get passed? Who opposed the Crittenden Compromise and why? Go ahead, Abby.
Pretty sure they didn't want to compromise.
Right. Lincoln and the Republicans were opposed it and defeated it because they were unwilling to compromise on free soil. They're like, we're for no slavery in any of the territories. Lincoln and the Republicans opposed it. They would not compromise on free soil. Number 40, why did the Confederates fire on Fort Sumter on April 12, 1861? Why did the Confederates fire on Fort Sumter? Go ahead, Lydia.
There's a supply ship that was going to bring some food.
Exactly. Lincoln had sent a supply ship. Fort Sumter, the Union soldiers in South Carolina and Fort Sumter were running out of supplies. They were running out of food, medical supplies, etc. So Lincoln resupplied it, but before the supply ship could arrive, Confederates fired on the fort for more than 30 hours. What did Lincoln do in response to the firing on Fort Sumter, Becca?
He said that it was a rebellion that should be put down.
Right, and he called for 75,000 troops. So Lincoln's response was, he called for 75,000 volunteer militiamen or whatever, volunteer troops to put down the rebellion. He called for 75,000 volunteer troops to put down the rebellion. And then what did 4 states do in response to that in the Upper South? What did the Upper South states do, like Virginia, North Carolina, etc.? Go ahead, Jack.
Seceded.
They too seceded. So the 4 states of the Upper South seceded, bringing the number in the Confederacy to 11. So the 4 states of the upper self-seceded, bringing the number of states in the Confederacy to 11. Any questions on that? All right, let's skip to do a little reconstruction. Yes?
How many troops did they send?
He called for 75,000 troops to put down the rebellion. As it turned out, they would need a lot more than 75,000. So we're going to skip to number 59. So we did some of this week. We're not going to get everything done through the whole outline, but that's going to be okay because we just did it. So we'll at least do what we did on Monday, or Tuesday here. So effects of the Civil War on industry. What was the effects of the Civil War on American industry and why? Ian?
Blew up the American industry by making like military weapons and clothing.
Yep, exactly. So greatly increased American industry because of the needs of the war effort. So American industry greatly increased because of the needs of the war effort. So American industry increased because of the needs of the war effort. Guns, uniforms, shoes, you name it. What was the effect of the Civil War, number 60, on the relationship between the federal government and the states? Effect of the Civil War on the relationship between the federal government and the states. Go ahead, Abby.
The
Haley?
federal,
So go ahead.
federal will be stronger than the state.
Yeah, basically it meant that the federal government reigned supreme over the states and that secession and nullification were kind of dead issues. So it meant that the federal government truly reigned supreme over the states and the ideas of nullification and secession from the Union were dead. Reconstruction, number 61. What does the term Reconstruction mean in general? What does the term Reconstruction mean in general? What's Reconstruction called?
Isn't that just the period of time following the Civil War in which the Union was kind of reestablished and the southern states were reunited?
Exactly. Basically all it means is reconstructing the governments of the southern states, and putting them back into the Union. Kind of the Union was broken, so the Union had to be put back together. The ex-Confederate states had to be reconstructed and readmitted into the Union. Reconstruction started before the Civil War ended with Lincoln's 10% plan of 1863. What was Lincoln's 10% plan of 1863 exactly? Jack?
Only 10% of the state's population needed to approve going back to the Union.
A loyalty oath. Take a loyalty oath. Yep. So 10% of the population took a loyalty oath. If 10% of the population took a loyalty oath, then they could be readmitted into the Union. So 10% of the population took an oath of loyalty, then they could be readmitted into the Union. It was really easy on the South. Lincoln wanted to be forgiving towards the South. All right, let's go to the next page. I just noticed here that when I did this summer, spent every week of the summer revising one unit. I didn't cross out 69. We never learned the Civil Rights Act of 1866, nor is the test going to test you on that. So cross out number 69. And then all I really want to do here is I want to do the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments and presidential and congressional reconstruction really quick. So presidential reconstruction, what can you tell me, number 63, about presidential reconstruction? You kind of did this yesterday, Nick?
It was easy on the South, and there were lots of pardons.
Right. It was relatively easy on the South. There's lots of pardons. What did they have to ratify under presidential reconstruction? Alyssa?
13th Amendment.
They had to ratify the 13th Amendment. And under presidential reconstruction for number 63, what did they not require in the constitutions? Becca? They did not require black suffrage in the constitutions, and therefore the constitutions kept blacks from voting. And then moving on to congressional reconstruction, which is number 71. What are the characteristics of congressional reconstruction? What did it do, Becca?
It was tough on the South.
And what did they divide the South into?
The military factions.
Right. The South was divided into military districts. It was very tough on the South. South was divided into military districts. And what amendment did they have to ratify, Alyssa?
14th.
The 14th Amendment. And did they have to guarantee black suffrage or not, Alyssa?
Yes.
Yep, they had to guarantee black suffrage right in their constitutions. And then let's just do the 3 Reconstruction Amendments. Number 64. The 13th Amendment did what? What did the 13th Amendment do? Alyssa?
Abolish slavery.
Right, abolish slavery. That's number 64. What number 70 did the 14th Amendment do? 14th Amendment, excuse me? 14th Amendment. Go ahead, Becca.
Use black citizenship.
Right, gave black citizenship. And remember it said, people born or naturalized in the U.S. were citizens and entitled to equal protection under the law. So it made black citizens. And it said people born or naturalized in the U.S. were citizens and entitled to equal protection under the law. And then finally, you guys have been awesome. Thank you for your dedication. You're really working your butts off, and you deserve a lot of credit for that. Number 81, the effect of the 15th Amendment. We'll do that in class today, but what did the 15th Amendment do? Go ahead.
Or didn't like guarantee black suffrage or something?
The right to vote. Yeah, so basically it was black suffrage, guarantee blacks the right to vote.